So your website is made of images. So the average website, 75% of the content is just images. And if you can reduce those, you can significantly improve the performance of your site. With an image CDN, we can make your site 80% lighter. And by reducing the images by 80%, you can, in many cases, reduce your entire page weight by 50%. So what is an image CDN? An image CDN is a special purpose content delivery network that makes your site faster by reducing the weight of your images and caching them near your users. That means you have a lighter website, which improves your SEO and conversions and revenue and lowers your carbon footprint. And we've doubled the size of our audience now. Welcome. So what about traditional CDNs? Traditional CDNs have a perverse incentive. So reducing the size of your images reduces their revenue. So if I cut your images in half, I charge you less for the bandwidth. For example, if you had a terabyte, 1,000 gigabytes of traffic at 20 cents a gig, you'd be paying $200 a month. And if I coerced the traditional CDN into cutting your traffic by 80%, they would make $40 a month instead of $200 a month. So how do we reduce size of images with an image CDN? We primarily use, we resize the images dimensionally. We make the images smaller to fit the devices that are visiting them. That's the device intelligence category. We can use client hints. So client hints are a method by which your browser suggests to the CDN how large the image should be. We honor the save data features in image CDNs. So save data is a feature where if you have a poor connection or if you're in a country where you don't have very good infrastructure, you might have this feature turned on in Chrome, and that your browser sends a hint to the CDN to tell it that we have a poor connection, and it could choose to make the images more or less optimized. And we support, in the general sense, URL parameters. You could say, I want the image to be 500 pixels wide, I want it to be significantly more compressed, or I don't care so much about quality, I just want to maximize my compression. So the second strategy we use is re-encoding images. So taking an image that was a JPEG, for example, and turning it into like a WebP, or an AVIF, or an HEIC. A lot of people try to do this manually, but it's extremely difficult, and by the time you've figured out how to do WebP, you will not have realized that AVIF is on your heels, as well as JPEG 2000, JPEG XR, JPEG everything else. Lastly, we recompress them. So you can take a JPEG and compress it into a better JPEG. If the device requesting it doesn't support WebP, for example, we can still take your 800 meg or 800K JPEG and turn it into a 100K JPEG. So here's my classic guinea pig. So basic image CDNs support URL parameters, like I said, where you can specify the width manually, 500 pixels wide, 250 pixels wide, or maybe specify the format manually, like I want this image to be a WebP. But an advanced image CDN takes it further and uses device intelligence to figure out what are the devices of my users and what are their capabilities. Does this device have a big screen or a small screen? Can I make the image smaller or bigger based on the properties of that device? And so these can run fully automatically. So you don't need to have any URL parameters. You don't need to make any changes to your website. You just get smaller images and a faster website. Using an image CDN with Magento is super easy because Magento allows you to change the base URL for media files. You have to do this in two places, for the secure URLs and the non-secure URLs. But essentially, you just get the delivery address or the domain that your content delivery network has provided with you, and you put it in there and save the changes. Done. Something like 30 seconds if you had your account set up already. Yeah, same thing that I just said. So the way it works is your users are when you save the changes to the base URL, the image paths now have this domain in front of them, and so your users are getting the images directly from the image CDN, and they're getting the website from whatever platform you're serving your site from. So I didn't give the title of the talk, but yes, I was talking about how you make money and go green at the same time. So I talked about how you make more money, right? You make your site faster, you get more conversions, and you sell more stuff. But it's also not obvious that this reduces your carbon footprint. So how do you go green by using an image CDN? Every byte that gets sent from your server to your end users goes all through the network infrastructure, and about half of the bytes that are half of the energy that's used for that transmission is near your end users. So if your end users are spread throughout the United States, where like a majority of the places have coal as the primary source of energy, most of the energy is on their end of the side. So we reduce the page weight of sites, which reduces the energy consumption of the network infrastructure between you and your end users. So here's an example. Here's a distribution of the power, which parts of the process between your servers and your end users is using energy and how much energy it's using. So like I said, everything from the internet plumbing is like the backbone of the internet, right, between you and your end users. So from the internet to your servers is about 50% of the energy consumption typically, and from the internet to your end users is the other 50%. And like I said, because they're scattered, like every cell phone tower in the United States, they're spread out, like every 5 square miles has a cell phone tower, and those all get power from their local grid. And so 50% of the energy being used by that means that you're essentially you're not getting the advantages of a data center, which has centralized all of its energy consumption into one area. So here's how you can compute your site's carbon footprint. First, take your site's traffic per month. We're going to use 1,000 gigabytes, a terabyte of traffic per month. And I took these numbers from the Sustainable Web Project, this Sustainable Web Design Project, which estimates that 0.81 kilowatt hours per gigabyte is used. It takes 0.81 kilowatt hours to move one data across the internet, which is pretty interesting, actually. So it would take us 810 kilowatt hours of energy to move 1,000 gigabytes of page views in a month. The global carbon emissions varies wildly depending on where you live, but they average to 442 grams of carbon or CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour. So our site before optimization took 360 kilograms of carbon. It put 360 kilograms of carbon into the atmosphere per month and 4,300 kilograms of carbon per year. So if I reduce the size of your website by 50%, I can save 2 tons of carbon from being emitted to the atmosphere. That's pretty interesting, right? So yeah, and now I'm realizing that I'm way ahead on time. So unfortunately, I'm wholly unprepared, having had 2 pre-parties. Thanks, guys, for all that. So that really is all I have to say about that. But I've collected some more people here. So what questions do you guys have about image CDNs or speeding up your website or carbon footprints? Anybody? I almost got one from you, but no. All right. Carbon, so the question was, is this something that we would pitch to our clients, or like how does it resonate, or like do I find, maybe another lead-on question you might have is like, do I find that my customers actually care about carbon emissions? Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't know. I mean, this talk is kind of me testing the waters, especially in New York, where it's not as common to say as in Silicon Valley, right? I'm the last talk, so there's already a poor sampling size of people to choose from here. But I don't know. The truth is, I'm not sure how well it resonates. But my belief is that if I can convince you that my products are going to make your website faster and make you more money, then you're not going to say no to a lower carbon footprint, right? So, I mean, I have the luxury of having a product that does both of those things, right? So, yeah, I'm not sure, but I know that this is something that we want more of in the world, and ours is a solution that does that. Yeah. Anyone else? Question? Yes. Okay, so you're asking, because an image CDN could change like the format or the size and et cetera of an image, how does Google's image search react to that, and does it affect your SEO? Is that what you're getting at with that?
Yeah.
Or does it negatively impact that?
Duplicate images now. Like, is the web key versus the JPEG?
Okay, yeah.
Are those seen as duplicate images, or are they
Okay.
confusion with the robot?
So yeah, I see what you're saying. So for the sake of the recording, you're asking if If the fact that we make many copies of the same image, does Google consider that to be a duplicate content problem where you get negatively impacted? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, so, okay, so the answer is it doesn't have any effect on that because Google knows when it sends accept headers and other HTTP headers to us, it knows that we're going to send a tailored response back to it in the content negotiation. So like for Google image search, they probably aren't going to be asking for WebPs. They're probably going to be asking for something that's super compatible, like a JPEG or something like this. And they're not duplicate content because the URL is exactly the same. Although if you're using URL parameters, they're not. But in general, if you're using a fully automatic advanced image CDN, the URLs will be the same. So there's no canonical or like authoritative URL that represents all the variants. It's just the same URL. Does that make sense?
It does, but the answer is surprising because like in Magento, you change the image CDN to native is going to spit out the JPEG or whatever was uploaded there. So now if you're going to pull that through the CDN and then you're going to get a WebP, one of you guys 301 redirect the source has the JPEG in it now, but the CDN. How does that work? Is it a 301 redirect?
No.
Sending a different header and the URL?
Your browser is sending, so the internet doesn't take for granted that the response that you get for every request will be the same. It's idempotent, so given the same request, you're expecting the same response, but your request differs. So your browser already tells your current CDN that it can support something like AVIF or WebP, and your CDN is choosing not to honor that, but mine and our others do honor that. And there's not a 301 redirect because the image tags that you had prior to the installation of the CDN would point to the local server, the Magento server, and after the installation of the CDN, it's pointing to our servers. So there's no redirect because Magento is generating the HTML with the image tags pointing to the image CDN. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. So how do we deal with the underlying infrastructure under our CDN and its unavailability at times? Yeah, so we have a couple strategies. We have POPs all over the world. We primarily use Amazon at the moment, AWS, who's also, well, yeah, this is not a sales pitch. Yeah, so image CDNs primarily use things like Amazon underneath. And advanced image CDNs will say, diversify this. So they go for a hybrid model, like using a data center near my house, for example. They could do that. And we make sure that we use many different providers and make each POP or point of presence totally self-sufficient. So if a POP in India loses connectivity with the Middle East, where it might be its nearest peer, it can continue functioning almost indefinitely while it waits for the backbone to be reestablished. So it's a combination of DNS, latency-based routing, removing routes that might have gone down, and POPs that are self-sufficient and no centralized system that prevents. Like, there's no one thing you could kill in a CDN that would kill all of the POPs. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a hard problem, as you can imagine, and it's a relatively expensive problem to solve. So, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had outages for Amazon. I've dealt with outages for Rackspace Cloud when that was a thing. I've dealt with outages for Azure. It went down because of a time zone bug. I mean, these things happen all the time. I used to live like 5 miles from US East 1 in Amazon in Ashburn, Virginia. And so I had a good connection to that POP, but sometimes it would go down. Like an S3 outage will take down Netflix, and God knows how many other people are like using the same web of services from Amazon. So we, and I suspect other CDNs, are well aware that these are not reliable systems. I mean, so maybe it's not obvious, but like in the past, I've been doing this for 25 years, building infrastructure and stuff like that. And in the beginning, people thought they could build computers so good that they could never fail, right? So you'd build like a mainframe. You'd spend like $400,000 on a computer that could almost never fail. But they don't never fail, they just almost never fail. And so it became obvious pretty early on, like in the early 2000s, that what you need is a distributed system made of commodity hardware, right? I don't want expensive computers. I want a lot of cheap computers. I know they're going to fail, and I need to build the system that's resilient to that. You sure can. Yep. So let's take the case of a system that's entirely on Amazon, for example. So in a case where US East 1 just drops off the face of the earth, what happens is the latency-based routing in Amazon's Route 53, the DNS provider in that case, it'd be the same for Cloudflare or whoever you use for DNS. They are constantly pinging the regions where you have service and trying to figure out which ones are available and what their availability is. And so if US East 1 just like vaporized, there would be maybe 5 minutes where people are still wandering into that region before nobody goes to that region at all, because it's not the shortest route for anybody anymore. Latency-based routing, if you don't know, is the way to figure out. In the past, we used to use geographical-based routing to say, like, I want the users to get requests from the nearest region. But that's actually not, that's a proxy goal for what you really want. What you really want is, I want your users to get the request from the fastest region. And if you're in the United States, if you're in California, that might be Singapore, because maybe there's an infrastructure problem between you and the east side of the United States, or something like that. So latency-based routing directs people to the nearest operational data center. Yep. Any other questions? This has turned into an infrastructure conversation. But you know what? You guys are the only ones here, so I'm here for that. Anybody else? Oh, well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it.